broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Ben, take it away.
Uh, Thanks so much, Jill, and thanks everybody for attending today. I really hope this is useful information for all of you, or at least gets you moving in the right direction, so that you can really help your staff. We've talked about in the past things like utilizing the cloud and bring your own device, and web-based tools and mobile device management, all that stuff. And we've always been, in our webinars, we're always trying to look for topics like this, and I think. The time is right, of course, to really explore how we can exploit this as best we can. So I really appreciate you all joining us today. And there's so much to go through with this topic, like all of our topics, that we're probably not going to be able to get through anything. So I encourage you to ask your questions. If there's other things as we go through that you want us to talk about, maybe more in depth in other engagements, we're also looking to explore other ways to communicate messages with you, especially now that people are so remote. So please feel free to give us that kind of feedback as well. That'd be really helpful for us. So introduction real quick. So, again, we were planning on doing some stuff about remote working anyway. So this is, when I was going through and I was making sure the slides were good for today, I had to update some of my language to focus where we are today. So there have been several trends that have been pushing us towards an anytime, anywhere workplace. Before anything happened with coronavirus, there's been demand for information and shorter windows to communicate. I mean, I think even before this, everyone can expect that they would send a message to someone on email, and if they didn't get a response quickly, they felt like they were ignored, or perhaps they would send a message through their CRM or something like that. There's always been this demand to get back to everyone so quickly, and we're always so connected to our phones and our accounts. So this was happening before any of these other trends. The cloud has really been on the rise the past several years. One thing I've been telling people is, we're in 2020 right now, and access to things like Office 365 and Microsoft Teams, which I'm going to talk a lot about today, and a lot of these other mobile tools exist now. And I can think even 10 years ago, when maybe iPhones were sort of still in their earlier adoption phase, where you had a lot of systems that were really centrally located in closets within people's offices. The cloud has really given us a lot more flexibility to have this kind of anytime, anywhere work. There's limited talent for certain positions requiring employer flexibility. When I was at a conference not too long ago, I was hearing people who they needed a specific technical expertise to work in their businesses and get this stuff working, and they were literally, especially people perhaps in the Midwest or other areas where the population is a little less dense than the Mid-Atlantic region. They were looking for highly specialized people who they just couldn't find in their towns, and so they had to find ways to get people working productively remotely, because they just couldn't find the person within a working commute. I mentioned this before, the rise of smartphones and tablets. I mean, now everything has an app. And if you can't do it on your phone, it's seen as inconvenient. I mean, even think about, maybe there's a lot of people doing like DoorDash and online deliveries and stuff like that now. I know just for myself, if I was doing it, I'd go to my phone first, and I probably wouldn't even want to deal with a website. And of course, coronavirus. I mean, this is making things a lot less optional. Obviously, we know a lot of states and locations have mandated work from home. Here in Maryland, we can't have gatherings of more than 10 people right now. That's really forced the matter, and it's forced us to be creative in how we work if we're going to be productive. I'm really happy. I've been telling Jill and a lot of the people I work with that we're kind of fortunate. We're in an industry where moving into this remote work, obviously we're going to have challenges, but we're able to pivot quite easily. Very difficult for a lot of other small businesses right now. For our agenda today, we're going to talk about key products that we feel are worth sort of discussing more. And obviously, this is going to be very limited. We can't get into everything that exists with these products. We're going to talk a little about Windows Virtual Desktop, which is a tool from Microsoft that is sort of like a terminal server type thing where you access your desktop in the cloud. More to come on that. Microsoft Teams and its connection to SharePoint. This is a very important collaboration tool, big response to a product called Slack, I think, that was a competitor, and sort of the evolution of things like Link and Skype. And then in general, software as a service and other sort of X as a service products. These products that exist where you go to a website and you have access to your bank or your accounting system or your CRM or something like that. The second part, we're going to pivot a little bit, is about how we manage technology in a world of remote work. I know we're having another webinar next Thursday where we take frequently asked questions. We already have a bunch of questions from the community about working in technology right now. But a big part of this is how do we actually make sure we have the type of responsibility and accountability we want. So first, we're going to talk a little about tracking and managing devices, making sure that the devices we use are supportable and properly maintained. We're going to talk about controlling the private flow of data over the public internet. Now that we're all working remotely, we're using our personal internet connections. We're maybe using our mobile device internet connections to do our work. How do we control this flow? How do we make sure it's secure? And then avoiding the idea of data sprawl. So while people may be decentralized, data is closely controlled. We're going to lose a lot of control over individuals that are not in our presence right now. So we need to do things that make it so that our data is still under control, so that if something happens to one of these devices or someone's internet connection or something like that, we have access to data, that data is secured and controlled. And probably the most important part, our Q&A, where we're going to go through your questions. Sorry, just one moment. So we'll start with Windows Virtual Desktop. So what is Windows Virtual Desktop? Windows Virtual Desktop is a comprehensive desktop and app virtualization service running in the cloud. So I know for a lot of you, that's a lot of technical talk. Virtualization is the idea of building a machine where the processing is handled somewhere else or in a limited capacity. So think of, for example, streaming services. When you're streaming something off of Netflix, that data exists in the cloud, and it's basically coming down to your Amazon Kindle stick or your Google Chromecast or your Apple TV. We're doing the same kind of thing. We're basically streaming down desktop images of services out with Microsoft, and this has a lot of important benefits. So what are the features for remote workers? So first off, you have support for any Windows 10 application in a remote session. So let's say, for the sake of argument, that I'm using a desktop application. I'm a law firm, and I'm doing some kind of case management application that exists locally on my PC, and that product is not, maybe fully cloud enabled, or I don't like the cloud enabled version. The web-based product, it's just not for me. I can build that product in a Windows Virtual Desktop session, and then from my home PC or my office PC or maybe my Mac computer, I can go in and work in that application in a cloud session. It has a lot of optimizations for Office 365 Pro Plus, so how it integrates with the broader Office suite. There's a whole conversation that can be had about it, so I'm not going to dig too far into it. There's something called multi-session support. So think of the idea of that you want to have maybe 10 virtual desktops running today and 15 tomorrow. That's the type of thing that can be done with these sorts of environments. I don't have to go out and procure 5 more machines or buy all of these terminal server licenses or get more RAM on a terminal server that I keep locally. I can just ask Microsoft, build me another desktop, and of course my bill will be adjusted, my consumption will be adjusted, but I don't have to go out and reinvent the wheel or get new architecture or something like that to make it work. So if this is, I don't want to dwell too much on this specific product. Getting this working obviously takes some architecture, engineering, and design. But these types of solutions, I think you're going to see a lot more of, especially as we move forward. there's a lot of benefits to the scalability of this product. So if you're interested in learning more, definitely an offline conversation needs to be had. Microsoft Teams. Now, this one is a lot more agile, and a lot of you may already have it or have access to it and just aren't even using it yet. So I felt it was really important for us to talk about Teams today. First off, free for about 6 months. I guess it's about 6 months because I guess it was maybe 2 weeks ago or so that Microsoft announced that they were going to allow people, in light of the coronavirus outbreak, to have access to this product to collaborate. I think that's really great. I think it's a limited version, so you'll have to forgive me. I don't know everything that you do and do not get. I think some of the conferencing features perhaps are limited on it. But here's the way it works for us. This is something DP Solutions is using right now. Literally before I got on this call, Jill and I were on a leadership call using Microsoft Teams where we were collaborating on our Excel spreadsheets that we were reporting on, having conversations about what was going on with the business, stuff like that. So anyway, it's a communication and collaboration platform. So the best analogy I can give is think about products like Skype or maybe Google Hangouts or Slack or these other sort of chat team meetings. And it really is a response to Slack. You could have in Slack these individual conversations with specific groups, conversations that were private, conversations that were public. You could share documents and collaborate on them within it. And Microsoft, as you might expect, didn't really want companies like Slack eating their lunch, especially with their 365 platform. It can do chat, video conferences, file storage, collaboration, and more. As I said on our call just now, we were all on our webcams for the most part. We were using voice chat using our microphones. We were editing a shared Excel document where everyone puts in their own numbers, our KPIs for the week. We were collaborating on it, making edits as we go. The person who was doing it was me. I was using a screen sharing feature. So I had the document open on my computer. I shared my screen within it so people could not just see my face, they could see me typing in the edits as we went. If they wanted to see something zoomed in, I could zoom in on it. Really powerful tool. And honestly, I would say we didn't really miss a beat on our meeting. It's basically the same stuff we went over normally, just as a group online. You can create teams with it. So for example, let's say you have different departments in your company and they need to have check-in calls, or they might ask each other questions. You can create a team for that. Or maybe you have policy documents that you want to share with a specific group and it needs to belong with that group. You can add that file to that team. Very easy to use and really a helpful tool. It's well integrated into Office 365. The best example I can give of this is I don't have to have Excel installed on my device to see the Excel spreadsheet if I have Teams installed. Teams has sort of a light version of Excel sort of built into the product so that when I click on my Excel file that the team has shared with me, I just click on it and I have a light version of Excel. I can go in, I can manipulate cells, I can edit stuff. Yes, I can't go in and create a huge, very detailed document with all the formulas that I would normally create, but I can get the basic stuff done. Really a nice feature, I think. I mentioned this before. It's a reaction to things like Slack and a replacement of Skype and Link. So Link doesn't really exist anymore. They're really reacting to Slack. And frankly, I think they're going to eat Slack's lunch when it's all said and done because the tightness of the 365 platform along with the collaboration, and I think losing some of the clunkiness that existed in some of the older Microsoft collaboration platforms, I think is really going to benefit them. And I can praise Microsoft for giving this for free for about 6 months, but obviously they see the bigger picture here, which is that they're really trying to get people to adopt this product. It's very mobile device friendly. I can't think of a single thing that I can do on the desktop that I can't do on the mobile app. So I'm really happy with that.
Hey, Ben, can I interrupt you for a second?
Sure.
Yeah, we just had a question come in related to Microsoft Office 365. If you're not on Office 365 yet, is Teams only available with our 365? How does that work?
I would have to do a little research to get specifics. I can tell you a few things. One is that if you have, one thing I like to do with Teams is I like to use it to have video conferences. I had a video conference with someone last week who didn't have the product. And so I could use Outlook to send that over to them and they could access a Teams meeting without having Teams. But to the real question that the listener asked, can you get it without the 365 platform? I'm not sure. I think you would need a Microsoft account. You would probably have to sign up for, I'm guessing, the lowest tier 365 account just to have access to the platform. That would probably give you a limited version of Teams. I would guess that if you have a Microsoft, so if they're giving it to you for free for 6 months, you probably have to create a Microsoft account if you don't already have one, which you probably should if you're using a Windows PC. That's how you get access to software on Windows now. And then if you log in, you should be able to get access to that free trial without the 365 account. I think that'll get you done. You'll have to excuse me. It's kind of difficult for me to know. I'm using the full version now. Going back is a little harder for me to know what that experience might be like. If you'd like, for the listener, after the webinar, you could send me an email, or we can have a chat afterwards, and I can maybe help you out, on your specific terms.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ben.
Hope that helps for now. All right, I'm going to pivot to SharePoint. So the reason I bring up SharePoint, it's a product that a lot of you have probably heard of already. It's been around for a while, but it's really gone through many sort of iterations, and especially in the cloud. So fundamentally, and this is really how it started, was as a document management platform, including for storage. I remember when people were first adopting SharePoint, the idea was creating workflows through SharePoint. That a document, let's say a mortgage application that had to go from different people within a company, you could create a workflow with SharePoint so that different people edited the document, put in their information, set flows for the next person, so on and so forth. But it still does that, but I think it's a little bit evolved from there. SharePoint Online is available as part of this. This was another piece of the 365 platform. So when you're using SharePoint Online, you basically have some kind of file. It's sort of like a file server that's a little bit smarter and allows for those collaboration items. So I should back up a second. When I was talking about Teams before, and I say I'm having a chat with Jill, and we were sharing this very PowerPoint amongst the two of us. We were able to share those documents, share that PowerPoint, because when I uploaded a file, it was saving it to our SharePoint in our 365 account. So SharePoint is the platform that a lot of that document management lives on in Office 365 right now, and it makes a lot of this possible. So SharePoint Online is a great hosted option for it. I should mention, though, that the hosted option is obviously going to have limitations that the fully customizable server option might not. It has intranet features. So an intranet, for those of you who don't know, is sort of like a company internal website or platform to share information. So you can do things like central access to company info. You could have a SharePoint intranet where on your intranet you could say, well, here's our weekly schedule, and here are our acceptable use policies, and here is where our client list is, or whatever kind of central information you want to have. You can do that. It also can link to specific applications. So let's say you want to use SharePoint as a kicking off point to some cloud-based app or some internal hosted app. You can do that within SharePoint. It can be sort of your go-to portal to share stuff. Now that's going to take customization, and obviously that's something that if you're going to deploy is going to be a little bit of a time and design effort. It's a little bit different if you say, well, I just want to be able to share things in Teams. That's a basic feature of SharePoint. It's good for retention and record management regulations. So if you're in a business where those 10 versions of the file are critical because we need to know for regulation purposes what happened on that 6th version, for example, SharePoint can be really helpful. There are versions of SharePoint that have that kind of document retention compliance management built in. So feel free to explore that if that's something that's of value to you. And it can utilize the same rights management rules in Active Directory. So really important, especially when we're talking about remote workplaces where people need to have access to the things they need and know more. We can create user groups, rights lists, etc., that will speak to SharePoint. So things that are visible to people, things that are shareable to people, align with the rights that we want to give them in Active Directory, much like we would do with a typical file server. So really important. Software as a service, I'd like to get through this one pretty quick. I think a lot of people know what this is. It's a subscription model where data can be accessed via the web. So tons of examples of this. You can think of Office 365, obviously, Dropbox, what we're using right now, GoToMeeting, Gmail, anything really where you get it through a website. These products are really good right now. I mean, obviously, you know, they're very flexible, access with some customization, and this is kind of the catch with software as a service, is that the more standard these products get, the less personal customization you're going to get, the more platform standardization you're going to see, like on a Google. They're very budget predictable. I mean, usually the subscription models are right there on their website, and they tend to be pretty straightforward. And they tend to have those tiers, you know, maybe 2 or 3 tiers where it says, hey, if you have a certain amount of users or files or access requirements, this is the tier you're in, and you get just get graduated as you go. These SaaS model products are starting to integrate with popular products like Office 365. I mean, so I think that's a really important thing to bring up, which is that if you are looking at any of these kind of software as a service web-based tools, we should be thinking about how are we going to use it with the rest of our products. Things like Office 365, the Microsoft suite, aren't really going to go away anytime soon. These are industry standard products. And so if you're looking for a industry specific software as a service platform, you should really be asking questions about how well does it integrate with different mobile devices, Office 365, etc. Because if they're not planning that stuff, you're going to find down the line, as you want to have a more digitally transformed environment, that you're going to have some struggles. You really need to think about their development cycle as a part of this. It can limit responsibilities to manage the technology side of software. So consider the fact that when you're using Office 365 or Gmail or anything, you never have to think about what is on the server end. You never have to think about replacing hard drives or having enough RAM. That's the big company's problem, and generally they're pretty good at managing scale. I mean, right now, even considering all of the remote work people are doing, things have been pretty stable on the internet, all things considered. I'm going to talk about this a little bit next week. We got a lot of questions on that, but the truth is that we've been doing a lot of work digitally already. We've been utilizing the internet a lot, and so the idea that we're doing it from our homes, does that really change the equation? I'm not really sure it does. It simplifies versioning and upgrading. You know, you don't ever have to worry about updating a database application that exists on everyone's individual PCs when that database application lives on a website where the software developer is the one that's doing the versioning and upgrading for you, and you don't have to worry about that. So I'm going to pivot a little bit because we need to talk about governance before we get into FAQs. This is really important because let's say, for the sake of argument, we've created work and productivity for people that are remote, but we need to manage this properly. It's really critical when having a remote workforce. So patch management, very critical in shielding assets. What devices are people using right now to work remotely? In my case, I'm doing this on the same laptop I use in the office, which has the same tools and management on it. So for me, the equation isn't all that much different. I'm still getting my patches and updates as I need them. But are your staff, did staff start getting set up with their home PCs, perhaps shared PCs that people are using? Well, now we really need to patch that machine up. We need to have some control over those home devices if they're going to be used to access company data. And that starts with patch management. We don't want a security weakness on a home device leading to a breach of data on the corporate side. Visibility. So we have to have an inventory as well. So it's really important in general that we know in some way, even if it's just manually done, what devices we're using to access our data. Um, we should know that that staff members use their cell phones to access this stuff, and they use their tablets to access that stuff, and their personal home device to access maybe nothing because maybe that's banned on corporate policy. And they've checked out their work laptop and brought it home with them. You know, some kind of understanding of where these devices exist, I think, is just really helpful from a governance perspective. Then you also have mobile device management. So I'm referring specifically to the thin devices, I shouldn't say thin devices, the cell phones, the Androids, the iOS devices like Apple iPhones and iPads, and other devices that are being used to access this data. If we're pushing more people to use these things and we don't have some kind of mobile device management control on them, we're really asking for a data breach. We need to make sure that they have proper configurations. We need to have the ability, if necessary, to wipe the company side of the data on the phone. We need to be able to enforce patches on those devices so that they have to get updated. Maybe have screen locking, password management, all that stuff, if people are using their personal mobile devices to access company information. Next, I want to pivot to channels of communication. Again, if everyone's in the same office and we're concerned about securing one local network and a pipe out versus maybe 50 people working in their home offices using 50 different internet connections and wireless access points. How do we communicate securely? So first is sometimes we need to use things like VPN. Now, I want to be clear here. Not everybody necessarily needs to use VPN for encrypted communications or secure communications, but oftentimes VPN is a solution. If I have a device that is accessing a file server, like a file mapping, and I'm doing that from home, there should be a VPN that connects between that home device and that file server out in the cloud, or some kind of encrypted channel. So it's important because basically the data that I'm transmitting over the public internet is wrapped up in a layer of mystery, if you will, a cloak of encryption where that data is traveling on the public internet, but we can't read it because we don't have that encryption key. It also helps with VPNs and other tools to verify verify what device is connecting to the asset. VPNs can recognize specific devices that are connecting versus just somebody randomly connecting from a foreign device. That's a really important thing. If staff is using Wi-Fi at home, they really need to make sure that the access point is secured with a password-protected connection. We shouldn't be using open Wi-Fi. People could think of an apartment building that might have, it might have 300 different access points, giving a signal out. If you have an open access point and someone connects it to it, they could presumably read the data that is going on your local network. So we need to have a secured, password-protected connection. And those devices that people are using, they should know that they need to be vendor-supportable devices. So if somebody has their wireless access point that they're using from their home to broadcast wirelessly, and that device has been there for 10 years, that's a potential point of breach, and we need to be mindful of that. The device needs to at least be vendor supported to have an up-to-date OS that has its own patches done on it. Usually the devices provided by home internet service providers, like Verizon or Comcast here in Maryland. Oftentimes, if you're staying with supportable plans, they will tell you when those devices have to get replaced. But I wouldn't take it for granted necessarily. Whenever we can, we need to use multi-factor authentication. So there's going to be, I think I've talked about this in the past with phishing. We have to secure the accounts that connect. We don't want somebody to pretend to be Ben Schmerler connecting to DP Solutions, Office 365 stuff. So we have multi-factor authentication in place in case someone breaks my username and password, that key is sent to me and me alone. And that's a much higher level of protection especially with these identity theft type crimes. So we really need to utilize multi-factor authentication when there are logins to sensitive assets. Last, before we get into the conclusion here, we want to avoid data sprawl, so there has to be some governance over the manner in which people work, which requires some communication. First, we need to define sensitive data and acceptable use in terms of how data is transmitted and stored. So now that we're working remotely, we really should refresh our people on this is the sensitive data that you work with, and we're giving you a lot of trust by allowing you to work from home and have access to, say, a client's name, address, phone number, or maybe their medical information if you're a medical office or something like that. So we should define what that data is and say this is exactly how you should be using that data. You're allowed to use it in our electronic medical record system. You're allowed to send it over this encrypted channel. You're not allowed to send it over your personal email. You're not allowed to store it on your mobile device. Whatever those rules are, we need to establish them and set and basically say this is where the highways are and this is where they aren't. We really need to watch USB drives and other devices. People really should know that company data should not go on personal USB drives. That has to be a communication and accountability thing on a management level. It's going to be really hard for us to control those things on personal devices. I mentioned mobile device management before, very critical. User awareness and phishing testing. So as most of you probably know, this is something we do for a number of our clients. Now is a great time to do phishing testing and user awareness training. There are a number of scams out there about COVID-19, getting people to click fake links, getting people to look at download, malware and things like that. People need to be aware of how to report incidents well, what suspicious things to look out for. I talk about creating a culture of security and compliance. When someone next to you can give you a tip about how to handle something properly because they're physically present, now we all have to be a little bit more, have to have a little more personal ownership about how we handle our devices and how we handle data, because we're going to be isolated a little bit and on an island. So I think it's really a good time for training and testing. I think I had before one client initially put off their security training because they're like, we need to get through this stuff. I said, this is exactly when we want to do training because people need to get this message. So key takeaways before you get to Q&A. This is really a culmination of big benefits of several current trends. The shift to the cloud, the rise of bring your own device and software as a service, I think has really made it so that in 2020, we can work a lot more effectively remotely. I'm speaking for myself, and obviously I'm a little biased. I work in the IT business. Everything I needed to do in the office, I can pretty much do remotely. I don't have those barriers. Obviously, for us, our big challenge is if we need to touch something physically, that's our challenge. Fortunately, there's more and more remote administration, but we are very fortunate that we have high-speed internet connections where we have it, although not as much as we should, unfortunately, for certain parts of the country, that we have these cloud-hosted providers, that these solutions exist. I just cannot imagine, even 10 years ago, not the Stone Ages, 10 years ago, dealing with this kind of remote need then. I think it would be much more difficult, and it's pretty difficult right now. We have to identify important work areas for your team. So it's really important before we create any kind of remote workplaces that we know exactly how it works, so that fundamentally a technology expert can help find the right kind of infrastructure to support a decentralized workforce. Like anything else, like all the things we've always talked about, if we understand how people need to work and what makes them successful, what makes your clients happy, so on and so forth, that's what's going to go into creating the right kind of technology for you. I mentioned Teams and how much I like it. I don't want to be over prescriptive though. That could be maybe not the best for everyone. There may be other tools that make more sense for your business. It all starts with understanding what you do as an organization and seeing where the technology can apply itself to make you more efficient and effective. Just with this time, it's how do we make it so with a bunch of devices we don't control or a bunch of people we don't see every day. We really have to focus on having strong maintenance and management procedures to avoid security loopholes. communication is really critical. You know, sort of spoiler on some of the stuff I talk about next week, I'm getting some questions about holding people accountable when they're working remotely. How do I get people to do the right things? And the technology can take us so far. You're not going to be able to install, you know, internet tracking tools on people's home PCs or internet connections. I think obviously that's not cool. But what we can do is we can do check-ins with people. We can talk with people. We can do video conferences with people. We can do time sheeting and things like that. We can use good management, good communications, good maintenance procedures to avoid the loopholes and the downsides that I think a lot of people fear about a decentralized workforce. And I think for us at DPS, it's worked really great so far, but it takes a lot of trust and a lot of management. So anyway, I'm gonna go to the Q&A. Our next webinar, as I mentioned, is April 2nd. So in light of this stuff, you know, I'm doing this from my living room. I'm gonna try and do more communications. We decided last week we were gonna do this FAQ session on COVID-19, just sort of send us your technology questions. I think I want to say I already have 10 questions in, and it's been like a day and a half since we opened the registration up on the webinar, which is really, really awesome. I want you to keep sending me questions. I will make sure that one way or the other, if we'll either broadcast them or I will reach out individually on people. We want to make sure this is a really good one. So I'm really looking forward to that. It'll be a little bit of a different webinar. I'm literally just going to take the stuff you guys prepare for me in advance, do as much homework as I can on them, give you some good responses, maybe get a little feedback, and then we can have online conversations. So with that, I'm going to pivot to Jill. Jill, what kind of questions do we have?
All right, thanks, Ben. All right, first question is, you briefly touched about creating policies. What kind of things should I include in a remote work policy?
Great question. So there's a lot of things that can exist in a remote work policy. So I have a few here that I wrote down. I had a question about this yesterday. First is incident response. So people should understand how to report incidents, what an incident constitutes, things like that. We have to reinforce a lot of the key things that we would normally do in an office. So for example, you know, when there is an alert, you find a weird pop-up or someone sends you a peculiar email, how do you respond to that? How do you respond when somebody says, hey, it's me, the boss, and I'm telling you to buy $500 in gift cards to Target to send to our clients to thank them, and just send them to me though, at, you know, whatever the scam is. People need to know how to respond to that stuff. So I would definitely have an instant response. We need to talk about some of the basics like operational hours and work flexibility, work from home policy. I think it's really important that we get back to some of the HR fundamentals that exist or with working from home. And also with a real reality here, which is that a lot of people who are working from home now have to do so with their children or their spouse or maybe someone they're taking care of around. You heard me have to stop for a second in the middle of this webinar. That's because my cat jumped on me in the middle of the webinar. So you have some interruptions like that and stuff too. So we have to have good HR policies, but that have a realistic expectation of what people can do, which, by the way, you will get in turn from your people. I think there has to be some kind of discussion and review of phishing and security awareness in general. We should be telling people that, hey, alerting people, hey, this is something you could face. You are not to open these emails. You are not to give people this kind of information unless I tell you so via phone. This is what you do if you need to ask somebody a question, those kinds of things. Communication procedures. We should be discussing with people what the procedures are to report challenges with work, having meetings, what constitutes a meeting versus an email chain versus a Teams conversation. You know, obviously with people remote, we don't want to get into these things where we have email threads that exist with 40 messages on them because nobody wants to pick up a phone. We don't need to have that kind of stuff. Also acceptable use, you know, people are working from home. Obviously, people are going to have a lot of freedom to do some of the things they might want to do around their house. You know, If somebody wants to have on their TV in the background, the news or or a cartoon for their kids or something, we're not gonna forbid that. But for a good acceptable use policy should say, well, you're using your company laptop at home for personal for work use. That doesn't mean you can install a game on it for your kid to play during your lunch break. We're not going to allow that kind of stuff. You're not allowed to do you're not allowed to share this kind of information with people. So you can't let you shouldn't let your family oversee some of the sensitive work you do if you're working in a particularly sensitive type of data and things like that. Maybe that if you're using a home PC, that you have a different account that you do your work on than the family has for their games or their internet stuff or their homework or whatever. Those are all important policies. I could go on and on and on. I would look at what you have internally already, the policies you have for your workplace and technology as they exist now, and think, how do they need to adapt for a decentralized workplace? And then those sort of answers will start coming for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Okay, excellent. Thank you. All right. You mentioned Teams and a few others. Are there any other collaboration tools that you recommend?
Sure. Slack is a good one. I obviously said that Microsoft's kind of trying to eat their lunch with Teams, but let's say you haven't gotten involved in collaboration before, you haven't done web conferencing before or video or web chats. Maybe your office is a we all sit down in the conference room kind of thing to talk things over. I don't want to spend a lot of money on this. I don't want to get over invested. I just want to try something. I want to have a space where I can do this work. And granted, don't do anything too sensitive in something you're experimenting with. But Slack is a good tool. It's free, easy to sign up for. Obviously, some of the things, just like GoToMeeting and stuff like that we're using right now, there are really easy tools that can do things like that. Certainly viable and easy enough to sign up with. I mean, pretty much if you have a mobile device or a laptop with a webcam and a mic, those sorts of things are good. I will say another thing I'll mention about collaboration tools, don't forget about the equipment you're using. I always recommend, if you're going to have a video chat or video conference, use headphones for your audio, and if you either use like a distinct microphone, or make sure that the microphone can't pick up other noises. You don't want to get echo on the calls and stuff like that. Right now, I'm using a Bluetooth headset that has a little microphone on it and earbuds, so I don't get any interference on that stuff. I know that's a challenge some people have. You might have to check your device settings, things like that. Usually people can get through those sorts of challenges. Other collaboration tools, be very careful about the file sharing ones, like Dropbox. Make sure if you start using those things that it's agreed upon as a company that what you're using for those kinds of collaboration tools. This is where we can get into that data sprawl challenge, where people could use, they really like their own tool, so they start using it, but now the data exists in 50 different places. We have to have some control over that stuff. If you're looking for a specific tool or a specific class of tool, feel free to reach out to me specifically. Hey, Ben, I'm looking to do X. Do you have any ideas? I may have some ideas.
Okay, great. And should staff use their own devices or company-provided ones?
Jill, you fell off for a second. I couldn't hear you.
Oh, okay, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. The question is, should staff use their own devices or company-provided devices?
Very complicated question, whether staff should use personal or company-owned devices. I think whenever possible, it is nice to have company-owned devices, because then you can put all your tools on it and have your own controls on it, and there's really no debate for why these rules exist and things like that. It's okay to use home PCs, though, within reason. So I talked about Windows Virtual Desktop, or maybe the web-based version of Office 365 with multi-factor authentication on it for the login. If you're using a personal device to access these sorts of things, and you have good authentication, where you're using multi-factor authentication so that you know that it's only the user, or as best as possible, it's the user that is who they say they are that's logging into these things, then what device you use is a little less important. You should still patch those devices. You should still make sure those are vendor supported devices. You shouldn't be using Windows XP machines to do this kind of work, or or whatever, old legacy equipment. Um, um, but if you're controlling the point of authentication, then the device matters a little bit less. Here, DP Solutions, we've got laptops for our people. Everyone's using those devices, but the phones are all personally owned. I have a Samsung phone that I use personally. We have people on staff that use iPhones. These are all personally owned devices, and we wouldn't issue. We have different ways of helping people out on their bills and things like that, but we don't want to issue 60 company smartphones, and I don't think people really want company-owned smartphones either. But what we do to compensate for that is we have mobile device management on these devices. We enforce password policies. We have the ability to remotely wipe the email on the phone and other DPS data. All of those sorts of things. So there's a trade-off. When you start allowing people to use their personal PCs, then they have to use those devices responsibly, and you should have technology that supports the personal device usage. If someone's not comfortable with you putting patch management on their personal device to work remotely, well, then I'm sorry, they can't work remotely. I mean, they have to be willing to allow security. That's how I'd approach it. Jill, do we have any other questions?
Actually, no, it doesn't look like we do.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody. I see we got one little message in chat. Okay, no other questions have come in. Great. Thanks everybody for joining us. I really appreciate it. Please, if you have any offline questions you want to go over, please feel free to send me an email. Happy to answer. Again, I encourage you to check out our webinar next week. It's going to be a well-attended one. We have a lot of questions coming in. I expect that even while we were on this webinar, we probably got another question. We got 5 this morning, so that's really encouraging. I want to give as much information as possible. And if there are other things you guys want to see, other messages you want to hear, different formats, I fully am embracing the remote workspace, and I will do what I can to help you guys out. So thanks very much. Thank you, Jill.
Okay, great. And just as a reminder, I will be posting the recording of today's webinar on our website, and I will be sending all attendees a link to that post.
All right, great.
Great.
Take care, everyone.
Okay, take care, everybody. Bye-bye.